Good afternoon, and welcome to the EMA's 25th Anniversary Knowledge Series. As part of this initiative, the EMA would have held two webinars thus far. The first would have focused on our Air Quality Index, and the second on understanding the role of the EMA in managing noise pollution. So today we are pleased to bring you the third installment of this series, where we will be presenting the EMA survey results on the use and impact of fireworks. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome our Zoom participants as well as our Facebook Live audience. We will be recording the webinar, which will be placed on our YouTube channel and can be accessed via our website at ema.co.tt. And just to give you an idea of the format of our webinar this afternoon, we will begin with the presentation, and that will be followed by a discussion segment. Please note, however, that we will only be entertaining non-verbal questions, so you are encouraged to utilize the chat box to place your question. Similarly, on our Facebook Live forum, we will also be utilizing the comment section for you to place your questions. Via the Zoom platform, we ask that you not utilize the raise hand option, but feel free to use the thumbs up or the clapping hands icon. Following the Q&A segment, we will launch a poll. Now this poll, it's very short. It's 4 questions just to get your feedback on the session. And it will be up for approximately 3 minutes, and we encourage you to complete it, as your feedback will be most beneficial to us as we improve the webinars in going forward. I will, however, provide a prompt at that point. So at this point, we will begin with the presentation for this afternoon. And our main presenter will be Ms. Giselle Joseph, and she is the Assistant Manager of the Air, Waste and Noise Unit attached to the Technical Services Department of the EMA. So I now hand over to Ms. Joseph.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Nadia. As indicated, today we will be presenting on the EMA's results that was obtained from the survey, the public survey that we would have circulated between June 19th and July 31st. And in terms of the survey, today we will be looking at a brief background on the EMA's involvement with the management of fireworks. We will also be looking at the objectives of the survey, what we wanted to achieve out of the survey. We will be discussing in detail the results that came out of the survey, and we will be looking at what we are proposing for the way forward. So the EMA has been involved from a technical advisory standpoint in the management of fireworks. We do provide the necessary technical input and support to those agencies with the primary responsibility of managing the use of fireworks. And it was to this end that we were invited to participate in the Joint Select Committee's inquiry into the adverse health effects associated with fireworks, specifically providing technical input on their impacts. Coming out of that Joint Select Committee hearing, we actually developed a technical paper that was used to present short, medium, and long-term measures related to the use of fireworks. And some of the measures that we had proposed included restricting imports to only the noiseless fireworks, as well as those with limited decibel limits. We also promoted usage restrictions based on the few festival days and for short durations. So you're looking at New Year's, Diwali, Eid. Coming out of that GSC hearing, the report also recommended conducting a holistic study on the potential and actual impacts related to the use of fireworks. And so the EMA actually completed an exercise a couple of years ago during New Year's Eve to actually determine if there were any potential impacts to ambient air quality from the discharge of fireworks. So we would have utilized our ambient air quality monitoring stations that at the time would have been located in Port of Spain and in Chaguanas. And we looked at the readings we recorded between the period of 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And based on the results that we would have obtained from that exercise, we did not record any measurable increase in the ambient air quality related to the use of fireworks during that intensive period. One of the other outcomes of that GSC report was greater collaboration with the TTPS, the TTFS, Customs, Ministry of Health, the EMA, and other stakeholders related to the sale, the import, the use of fireworks. That resulted in the formation of a National Fireworks Committee, of which EMA was a part. And the first item for that committee was actually looking at defining what is a scratch bomb and pushing forward legislative measures for actually banning the scratch bomb, which was successfully passed. So we also looked at other short, medium, and long-term measures as part of that committee. So coming out of the recommendations from that, the discussions held with the committee, the EMA actually made recommendations to its line ministry, that is the Ministry of Planning and Development, for banning of the traditional fireworks and promoting the use of noiseless alternatives. And for this request, the ministry actually requested further information from the EMA regarding any additional consultations that would have been conducted to support the recommendation. We therefore decided that we would try to host some additional consultations to meet that requirement. And so we invited stakeholders involved in the management of fireworks to plan those consultations. So some of the same stakeholders that would have been involved in the National Fireworks Committee, we asked for representatives from those agencies to be part of the planning of these consultations. However, before we can actually fully execute our plan for these consultations, we had the impact of COVID-19 and the restrictions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we had to rethink the approach to getting the information we needed to support the recommendation. So this is where the decision to host a national survey came from. We wanted to make sure that we try to reach as many persons as possible to get a good all-around feedback on the use and the impacts of fireworks. So in terms of the survey objectives, we looked at use, impacts, and we also tried to look at how the use compared with the impacts and also the preferred actions for dealing with fireworks. We didn't want it to just be an opinion survey. We wanted it to be more or less balanced. So we wanted to get data based on the use, the persons who would be using them, persons who don't use them, who was impacted and how, and as well what they would prefer in terms of recommended actions moving forward. In terms of determining the sample size, we utilized a tool, an online sample size calculator by Rowsoft. And for a minimum sample, sample for a population of 1.4 million, we utilized a margin of error of about 5%, confidence interval of 99%, and a response distribution of 50% to try and get the best results that we could. And the minimum sample identified from the calculator was 664 persons. And thankfully, we were able to more than meet that requirement and exceed the requirement with just under 3,000 persons participating during the time that the survey was circulated between June 19th and July 31st, which is approximately 6 weeks. So moving into the results of the survey, we'll start with the demographics. And in terms of the location of respondents, we saw the largest participation coming from the Regional Corporation of Tunapuna Piarco with just under 19% participation. The closest, nearest participating regional corporation was also the Diego Martin Regional Corporation with just under 15%. We also had good participation in Central Trinidad, the Borough of Chaguanas, Cuba Tabaqui Talparo Regional Corporation, the Penal Davie Regional Corporation as well, also in the city of Port of Spain. We also had participation from Tobago as well, so we did get a good spread of participants across the country. In terms of the age of the respondents, the largest grouping that would have participated is what we would consider our young adults, aged 25 to 34, followed closely by the next grouping of age 35 to 44. And then for the increase in age categories, we saw gradual decreases in the percentage participation, well, of course, with the exception of the 18 to 24 grouping, which would have contributed to just about 7% participation. In terms of gender, our female participants was most present in participating in this survey with a 73% participation in terms of respondents. In terms of the number of persons in households, the largest grouping would have been persons coming from the household with 3 to 4 persons. That is almost 50% of our participants. The next closest grouping would be for the 1 to 2 person household with just about 25% participation. For pet ownership, we got 82% of participants indicating that they did own pets. And out of that 82%, 51% indicated that they owned dogs, 15% owned a cat, 11% owned a bird, and then 5% owned other types of pets. Some of the pets, quote unquote, that were mentioned were actually farm animals and wildlife. So persons took the opportunity to mention those as well. We asked the type of home that persons would have resided in to get an idea of how close by neighbors would be in terms of the type of household. It's not a true representation, but it's just to give an idea. And for the most part, 80% of the participants indicated that they reside in a single family home, with the others even more or less evenly distributed under 10%. So we got what is traditionally persons residing in single family homes being the majority of participants for this exercise. Moving on to fireworks use. We asked persons if them or anyone in their household had purchased fireworks for use at home in the last 5 years. And we specified 5 years because we wanted to get a picture of what would be the current trends as opposed to looking at more historical data. And we had 87% indicating that no, they did not purchase fireworks, 13% indicating that they did. And we also asked where they were purchased. So for the 13% that indicated that yes, they had purchased, they mainly purchased from roadside vendors at 56%, also from outlets or stores, 39%, 1% indicated they purchased from the market, and 4% indicated they purchased from other sources, including the mall, Diwali Nagar, Fire One Fireworks, etc. So in terms of typical use, we asked persons during what periods or when they would usually utilize fireworks. The majority of persons indicated during the New Year's Eve period, which just under 50%. The next largest group would utilize during the national, cultural, and religious events or holidays, with just over 30%. Other persons indicated that they utilized for other activities, and a small percentage indicated that they utilized for celebratory events like weddings, birthdays, christenings, etc. In terms of where they were used, Again, the majority indicated that they would have utilized in the front or backyard, which was just under 50%. And of course, this is important based on the type of households that persons indicated that they lived in, with the largest being the single family home. We would expect that there would be a back or front yard. And so those were the most popular places that persons discharged their fireworks. We also saw the second largest percentage at just under 40% discharging in the road or the street, 10% indicating that they discharge in the public park or field, and 2% indicating in other locations, including other residents or relatives' homes, vacant land, beach, Diwali Nagar, etc. So moving on to the fireworks impact. We asked persons if they had ever been impacted by fireworks, and the majority, 79%, indicated yes, they were impacted, with 21% indicating that no, they were not impacted. And if we go back to that graph, that pie chart that we indicated for the ones that indicated whether they purchased or not, we see some similarities in terms of the percentage. The persons who indicated they were impacted, just under 80%, and the persons who did not purchase, was just over 80%. So we saw some similarities there that could provide a link to the use with respect to who used and who were impacted. We also asked who were affected by the use of fireworks in their household, and the largest percentage of persons impacted were over 65 years of age. The second largest grouping was between 51 to 65 years of age, the third largest being 19 to 35 years of age. We did have just under 10% indicating that infants were impacted, but the majority of persons who would have been impacted fell within that 19 to over 65-year range. In terms of pets, the percentage of pets that were impacted that were indicated in the survey included dogs at 60%, 17% of the cats were identified as being impacted, 13% of the respondents indicated that the birds were impacted, and 10% indicated their other animals or pets were affected. Now, this is just a data map to give an idea of the typical impacts that were reported by persons related to fireworks. The largest percentage of persons indicating that their pets would become traumatized and sometimes even resulting in death. So that was the largest group of persons who reported the type of impacts from the use of fireworks. Other impacts reported included anxiety and PTSD trigger, sleep deprivation, stress from property damage, physical damage to persons due to burns, blasts, injuries, sinus problems, etc. So we had a large array of impacts listed, and these are the ones that were most popular based on the respondents. In terms of the source of impact, the majority of persons indicated that their neighbor was the source of impact at 56%. We also saw an even distribution between nearby events and national religious cultural activities, both at 22%. So the overwhelming majority of persons who indicated they were impacted by fireworks were impacted by use by their neighbor. In terms of the time of impact, the largest percentage of persons indicated they were impacted between the hours of 9 to 12 p.m. at 63%. The second largest grouping indicated they're being impacted during the period of 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. And the last set of persons indicated that 14% between hours of 6 to 9 p.m. No one actually indicated that they were impacted between the hours of 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So the majority of persons were impacted between that 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. time period. In terms of the frequency of disturbance, the overwhelming majority indicated that they were impacted only during national, cultural, religious events holidays, as well as New Year's Eve, with almost 90% of the respondents indicating that period. Other persons indicated that it was infrequently, either quarterly, monthly, or daily. And I'm not sure what would be happening with that daily, but most persons were only impacted during specific events. And if we want to compare the results that we got from the time periods where persons were typically impacted and the time periods or the times when persons actually used these fireworks, we would see a correlation between both results, where if you counted the almost 50% for New Year's Eve and the 33% for the national, religious, and cultural events, the total would be almost equivalent to the 90% that would have been indicated in terms of the time when they would have been impacted. So we saw that correlation there. So moving on to preferred actions, we gave some options for persons to identify what they would like to see in terms of moving forward for treatment of fireworks. And of course, the largest group of persons at almost, just over 45% indicated that they would prefer the ban on the use of the traditional noisy fireworks and allow only the use of the noise reducing fireworks. The second largest percentage at 35% indicated they wanted a ban on the use of all fireworks. The third largest percentage at just over 20% indicated that they wouldn't mind restriction of the use of fireworks only to certain locations and or zones. We also had persons indicating that restriction to the use of fireworks under a licensing system implemented by the National Security is preferred, and restriction of the use of fireworks to only certain locations. The restriction of the use of fireworks based on the different types and who can use them. So in terms of the different ratings of fireworks and who can use them and when, there was a small percentage as well that indicated that they would prefer that action. And then the smallest percentage of persons, just under 3%, indicated that they had no problems with how fireworks are currently managed and they do not need to see any further action. So this is a snapshot of some of the additional comments we received for the survey. As you would see, a lot of the additional comments centered on how they would like to see fireworks treated with moving forward. So the largest percentage for these types of comments came for those who would want to promote, again, the use of the silent fireworks alternatives. There's another large percentage that spoke to stricter enforcement and fines being implemented for what is currently in place. Persons also spoke about the, again, complete ban of all fireworks, ban on the importation, sale, and use of the traditional fireworks, and ban of the use of fireworks in residential areas. In terms of other additional comments, not related to the future actions, persons gave general comments related to the impacts to their pets. They also spoke about the health risk to the young, the sick, and the elderly persons who resided in their households. Some highlighted the potential for property damage and the fire hazard associated with fireworks. Also, persons identified the major air and noise pollutants that may result from plastic waste and from spent casings in the use of fireworks. So we had an array of comments that were added at the end of the survey by the different participants. So moving to the way forward, it is the intention of the EMA to incorporate any additional comments received from today's webinar into the final report that will be prepared on these results of this survey. So it's very important that any comments that you have, that you please share them. We will post an email where that you can post your additional comments or questions for the EMA on this presentation. We also plan to submit the final report on the survey to the ministry in support of the previous recommendation that was made. And this is planned for the first week in October. So all of the results and all the comments received, we will be incorporating into our report that will be submitted to the Ministry of Planning and Development. And we will continue to provide technical support to the lead agencies and ministries in the management of fireworks. So the TTPS, the TTFS, customs, all of those who have a role to play, we will continue to provide that technical support in relation to the impacts of fireworks. So we move to questions, and for those who would like, they can also post or email their questions to our dedicated email, emawebinars@ema.co.tt.
Thank you, Giselle, for that very insightful presentation into the results of the survey on the use and impact of fireworks. So I just want to remind everyone that if you want to post your questions, it should be posted via the chat box option so that we will be able to respond via that avenue. And just to get the discussion going, Giselle, was there any data obtained on the impact of the fireworks on property or injury to person?
No, what we would have gotten were comments provided in response to the last question of the survey. So there was no design of the survey to obtain that data in any way. All we have is a comment from persons or several persons who would have indicated that it is an impact related to fireworks. So we can't make any statements regarding any property damage associated with fireworks just based on the results of this survey.
Okay, thank you, Giselle. So our next question, what is the current fines, if any, for fireworks related offenses?
Okay, so under the fireworks regulations of the Summary Offences Act, there are two different fines stipulated. There's a fine of $1,000 related to discharge of fireworks within a town or city, and that is a town or city as defined under the regulations. There's also a fine of $400 associated with the discharge of fireworks either within 60 feet of any road or street in any place outside of the town or city that was previously stipulated. So places outside of those towns or cities, there's a fine for discharging within 60 feet of any road or street. $400, sorry.
Thank you for that response. We move to our next question, and it's concerning the recommendations that the EMA will put forward to the ministry. And it really is asking if the recommendations to the ministry will be to ban traditional fireworks and permit only noiseless alternatives.
Yes, so that was the original recommendation made, and it was also the overwhelming majority of the persons who participated in the survey. So the results of that survey will then lend to the recommendation that we would have originally put forward. And once we submit that, it would just be to determine whether or not the powers that be decide to take our recommendation into consideration. Because we must note that it is just a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up to that question, will the report prepared for the Ministry of Planning be available to the public?
I don't see why not. I'm sure we can make the results because it was a public survey. So the results, presentation of the results to the public would be the intention. So that final report can be made available to the public.
And the next question, during the data collection, Was any background monitoring conducted prior to fireworks discharge and post discharge to ensure the background level?
Yes. Now, remember the EMA's ambient air quality monitoring stations are in continuous operation. So from since 2015 to date, those stations have been in operation and collecting data. So up to and leading to the point where we looked at the measurements recorded during the periods where the heightened levels of fireworks use are recorded, that data would have constituted the baseline data for those areas. So yes, we would have collected baseline background levels when we were doing the additional monitoring.
Okay, thank you for that response, Giselle. So, just out of for information, in doing that sort of background and research, can you provide some comments on any other jurisdictions that currently utilize noiseless fireworks?
In terms of the research that we would have conducted, because we would have conducted research in also helping to inform our recommendations, there are cities in various countries that have instituted similar type measures. So in one of the cities in Italy actually has adopted the same approach that the EMA is recommending in the banning of the traditional and only promoting the use of the noiseless vision. We actually have in other cities, like, well, for the states, the US, the state of Massachusetts is one of those states that actually has a ban on consumer fireworks, meaning that the regular public cannot purchase fireworks for use. It is only allowed by professionals under a licensing system. And a similar arrangement actually is adopted in Chile as well, where the traditional, well, not so much traditional, but the use of fireworks is restricted to only professionals. So if you would like to take in a display, it would have to be organized by a professional under a licensing system. There are countries in Europe that are also moving into that approach as well. Currently in Germany, though, they actually have a restriction for when fireworks can be purchased. And it's only for 3 days leading up to New Year's Eve, where persons can purchase and use fireworks. Outside of that, it is not allowed. But we have seen a trend of more and more countries moving towards the use, restricting the use of the traditional fireworks, particularly among the regular consumer.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up to the discussion on noiseless fireworks, there is a question asking about has the noise level, I'm assuming it is minimal, of noiseless fireworks been checked?
Can you just repeat that?
Has the has the noise level of noiseless fireworks been checked?
In terms of noise levels, you're looking at less than the 90 decibel range from the limited research that we would have conducted. Typically, the noisy or the traditional fireworks, the noise levels range between 125 to 155 decibels, around 140 decibels. So if you're looking at what we consider the noise, quote unquote, noiseless fireworks, we're looking at less than 100, less than 90 decibels for these types of fireworks.
Okay, thank you to that, Giselle. So the next question, can you indicate the sampling methodology for this survey, or would a stratified or purposive methodology have been more appropriate?
In terms of the sampling methodology, looking at the survey itself and not any other study that would have been conducted, I'm just trying to understand to be able to respond. What they can do is probably include the question in the email and we can provide a detailed response accordingly.
Okay, thank you for that response, Giselle. So the second question, judging from the survey results, it seems that young families, especially with women present, are most affected, sorry. This surely would have been evident by the number of female callers to a complaints desk over the last 2 decades. Has the EMA made any real effort to address this?
In terms of fireworks, I'm assuming, in terms of fireworks, remember the only thing the EMA does is make recommendations to the powers that actually have the responsibility for enforcing the regulations related to fireworks. And as would have been indicated, the EMA has been involved in the National Fireworks Committee. We do make recommendations as far as possible for the measures that can be implemented for treating with the use of fireworks. Remember, the issue of fireworks is something that is best dealt with on the front end as opposed to the back end, because the EMA is limited in terms of the actions it can take after the fact. The best way to treat with fireworks is actually to treat with at source in terms of regulating the import, the sale, the use of the fireworks. And that is where you will see the actual benefits in terms of minimizing impacts. So in terms of those complaints or, for want of a better word, concerns raised, the EMA does take those things into consideration. It would have been one of the things we would have taken into consideration in our original recommendations and the feedback provided to these other stakeholders. So those are the kinds of things that we would do in terms of our role, because we have to remember that our role is not in terms of regulating the use of fireworks. It's more providing a technical support or technical input from a health impact perspective or environmental impact perspective to those persons who have the primary responsibility for treating with fireworks.
Thank you, Giselle. And I just want to apologize. We seem to have a little bit of an audio issue with Giselle. So hopefully by the time we get to the next question, that would be rectified. So I would like to move on to the next question. In the actual regulation, is a detailed time is there a detailed times for which fireworks are allowed to be discharged or used?
Okay, I think we have it sorted now. Yes. Can you just repeat the question, because I was just busy trying to sort out my audio?
Sure, Giselle, no problem. In the actual regulation for fireworks, is a detailed time provided for fireworks to be discharged or used?
No, there's no specific time specified. That it's merely with respect to where it can be used. So again, as I would have indicated, it specifies use in proximity to within any town or city, and outside of a town or city, in use in proximity to any road or street outside of those areas. So the penalties are based on use itself. It's not based on duration or time period or any restrictions as such.
Okay, and this next question comes from one of our Facebook viewers. Over the last 10 years, how many people have been fined under the Act?
How many people have been fined under our Act? That will be none, because we do not regulate the use of fireworks under the EM Act. So in terms of the other legislation, that information would have to be obtained from the TTPS, because they are the ones with the responsibility for regulating the use of fireworks under the fireworks regulations.
Okay. Thank you, Giselle. So the next question, will there be a recommendation from the EMA to increase fines as well as enforcement going forward?
We can certainly have those discussions at the committee level. Remember, we can only make recommendations, and if it is determined that increased penalties can go a long way to helping to improve compliance with these regulations, then certainly we will make that recommendation. But of course, we will have to have those discussions with all of the relevant stakeholders. So in terms of our involvement in the committees that we're involved in, we can certainly bring that up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, it's actually several questions, but I will probably just ask you part of it. It should be safe to say that there are only a handful of importers of fireworks or explosives. Has the EMA engaged these people, and what has been the result?
Our engagement would not have been in any direct manner because, again, we make recommendations to persons who have that responsibility. So it would be a bit presumptuous of us to engage those persons that import fireworks when we have no control or jurisdiction over that. That would be mainly the Customs and Excise Division and to a lesser extent the Ministry of Trade. So we would not have any reason to directly engage those users of fireworks. What we would do is, for example, persons who are having an event that may utilize fireworks, when they apply for a variation and they indicate that they intend to use fireworks as part of the activity, depending on where they are located, we will engage them to determine any measures that they may have put in place to minimize the impacts related to fireworks. But in terms of importation and sale, we will not directly engage those persons for discussions because, again, under our remit, we do not have control or jurisdiction over those persons.
Thanks, Giselle. So this is a comment. As it is, we are a very noisy society, especially when liming. I think the restrictions and penalties are the best way to go because it affects so many otherwise, children, elderly, animals, and so on. So we thank you for that comment, and we move straight into the next question. Thanks for the presentation. What about the impacts on the animals in the zoo? At one point, there was some discussion on the relocation of the zoo. Would this still be an issue with the noiseless fireworks?
Well, it depends on the impacts that would be measured based on the location that they are discharged. So again, in terms of moving to the noiseless version, depending on where they are discharged and by whom they're discharged. So the regular consumer discharging the noiseless may not have as high an impact as maybe a professional display. So in terms of usage and where it can be used, discussions can be held about appropriate locations. You know, some of the recommendations made in other areas or jurisdictions are offshore discharge for whatever major displays. So in terms of selecting the ideal location for discharge, that is a consideration for any impacts that may be for those animals in the zoo that we want to take into consideration. And again, we do so based on recommendations. So if the TTPS wanted to grant a license for a professional display, they are free to discuss with the EMA any recommendations regarding location of use, duration, as well as time period. That is also important. So in that respect, we can make those recommendations in terms of where they can be used and how they can be used to minimize the impact.
Great, thank you. So the next question, will your recommendation also involve a specialized laboratory or entity that inspect noise and pollution of the products imported to the country as part of the sales or import license to ensure that products are in line with regulation?
I know that the TTBS has a role to play in terms of product quality and specifications. Usually in terms of import and sale, if it is we're looking at the noise level, then the ratings associated with the various types are what will be considered in terms of the restrictions. The other aspects will also be considered, and they can actually be considered in terms of discussions for some of the restrictions that can be imposed. Because again, we will make recommendations not only on the noise, but any other potential impacts that may be associated. So it will be strictly based on that in terms of quality and whatnot. The TTBS, I think, are the ones that would usually make recommendations or check on those requirements.
Okay, thank you for that response, Giselle. I just want to alert the viewers that in a minute or two, we will be launching the poll, so please look out for it, and we encourage you to complete it. So our next question, is it correct to say that your recommendations are based on the noise and environmental aspects and does not take into consideration the safety aspects?
Yes, because that is mainly based on our the jurisdiction of the EMA. However, we can also mention these aspects as well. In terms of the safety aspects, other agencies such as OSHA may come into play here, but most of the recommendations are going to be made based on the noise related impacts. So the environmental impacts, if there are any air pollution related impacts, we will certainly highlight those that are within our remit to measure and monitor. The safety aspects can be mentioned, but from a public perspective, in terms of any potential damage to other persons from the use of fireworks.
Okay, thank you, Giselle. So our next question is both a comment question. Fireworks is mostly heard or seen on occasions in most countries, including ours. But what about someone who lives opposite a garage that fixes cars daily from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., where children are at home all day trying to study and so on? All we can hear from the inside our homes are noises generated from air guns pounding, etc. So maybe at this point we could just clarify the whole management of noise versus how you manage fireworks.
Okay, so in terms of noise, again, the EMA will manage noise under its remit. And for those who would have been at the last webinar that focused on our role in the management of noise, if the EMA receives a complaint, we do have a complaint hotline. If we receive a complaint, we will investigate that complaint in relation to the impacts identified by the person making the complaint. In investigation, we may sometimes identify that other jurisdictions have a role to play aspect where the garage is located in an area that it may or may not be zoned for. That is where the Town and Country Planning Division will come in. And we usually would invite or engage those parties as well to get involved in terms of the investigation. We have actually taken the position to include those persons in investigating any complaints where we identify they have a role to play. And as indicated, when we do come out to investigate a noise-related complaint, we have to do measurements. Measurements are taken at the property boundary of the source of the sound or the property boundary of the nearest receptor. And that measurement is taken for a minimum of 30 minutes, which is required by law, utilizing specified equipment with specific manufacturer specs for utilization for the monitoring. Once the measurement has been taken, the EMA will then do their recommendation if there is a breach recorded for enforcement action. If there's no breach recorded, then the complainant will be informed of the findings of the investigation. But again, in terms of the EMA's investigation process, as indicated, everything is retroactive. So any action to be taken is retroactive as limited by the restrictions of our legislation. And any direct or immediate intervention can be made by the TTPS under the Summary Offences Act.
Right. So I just want to highlight this comment. Good point in having better coordination with other agencies who have primary jurisdiction to address this issue. Need to do this as a priority as the EMA is always being bombarded with the issue to resolve. It will be great to have the ban on noisy fireworks. So we thank you for that comment. And we move on to another question, and it has to do, Giselle, just on a follow-up to what you mentioned prior about the whole issue of noise. And does the EMA's Environmental Police Unit have a role to play with respect to responding to complaints of the release of fireworks?
The police can, but just remember, well, for those who are unaware, the environmental police assigned to the EMA are assigned to discharge the functions as stipulated under our legislation. So under the noise pollution control rules, the environmental sensitive areas and species rules, etc., those will be the primary focus and function of the environmental police, recognizing that it is just a small group of officers on a shift basis, operating on a shift basis, and also recognizing that to treat with fireworks, you need to have an immediate response. These police are only located in one place, which is Shagona. So if we were to try and deal with complaints related to fireworks, by the time we get to the complaint location, the issue or complaint would probably have passed and we would not have anything to investigate. Again, as indicated, our powers of intervention are retroactive in terms of we have to take a measurement. It has to be for a minimum time of 30 minutes, and you have to register a breach of both the equivalent sound pressure level as well as the LP in the case of fireworks, which is not very practical. And this is why the EMA does not regulate fireworks under its legislation. What can be done is in the course of the police, the environmental police doing their other duties, if they present a situation where they can intervene as police officers, they will do so. But it's not the primary function of the environmental police officers to respond to any and all issues related or under the jurisdiction of the police, as they have been brought into the EMA mainly for the execution of duties under our legislation.
So thank you very much, Giselle, for your responses to several questions. As we mentioned before, if we were not able to provide the responses during this question and answer segment, we have provided the email address whereby which you can submit those comments as we seek to submit the recommendations with respect to how we move forward with fireworks. I also want to thank all of our participants this afternoon and invite you to join our next webinar on September 8th, which will focus on getting a better understanding of the Certificate of Environmental Clearance process. So as we end, I encourage you to stay safe and please wear a mask. Thank you.